For my project, I chose to work on conformity. And so basically, conformity boiled down is some source of social influence that involves a change in an individual's belief or behavior. More simply, it is when group pressures force your hand to make decisions that you internally don't agree with. There are a lot of places that this might occur, most often happening in social settings and work settings, a school setting, college, basically any type of social setting you can think of. There are different types of conformity. One of the types that I went over in the PowerPoint was compliance. This often occurs when an individual accepts the group influence in hopes to achieve a reaction from the majority of the group. This term that is probably more commonly heard around is peer pressure. So you're oftentimes, an individual will be doing something not for themselves, and it might be something that themselves disagree with, but in order to achieve the reaction that they want from the people, from the majority, they'll do something that they often, don't agree with. Another type of conformity is internalization. This type of conformity happens when a person accepts influence because of the content of the induced behavior is intrinsically rewarding to the person. So this is actually the deepest level of conformity there is. This often happens when the majority has greater knowledge than the minority. So oftentimes the individual is just conforming because it is rewarding for them personally. Another type is ingratiational. This is when a person conforms to impress or gain favor or acceptance from other people. This is often arguably the most dangerous type of conformity because there is no limit to what people might do when they're trying to gain acceptance from others. It's sort of similar to peer pressure, but a little difference there. An example would be when a group is doing something you do not agree with, but choose to go along with them in order to feel accepted. And that's why I kind of said it is dangerous earlier. Obviously, it depends on the circumstance. It can, on the spectrum, if it's, dangerous to what you're conforming to or not so dangerous. Next, I'm going to be going over an experiment that was done by a sheriff in 1935. So this guy conducted an experiment, and the purpose was to demonstrate that people often conform to group norms when they are put in ambiguous situations. So what he did was it's called an autokinetic effect. So they put a small spot of light that was projected on the wall, and then it was in a dark room, and it looked like it moves, but it was still. So it was basically just a visual illusion. So the participants were tested in groups of 3 beforehand, and what they did was they took 2 people who had similar ideas on the light not moving or moving, and then one person who had different than those 2 people, and they put them in the same room. Basically, so with all the research that they did, they came to understanding that, it makes sense that one person would, more often than not, agree with those 2 people, even though previously they're looking at the same dot, which is interesting. Kind of an example of this would be like in high school or middle school when the teacher would ask, you guys took a test, the teacher would ask raise your hands if you answered A for question 2. And half the class raises their hands, everyone's got that feeling where they're like, oh, if half the class answered A, I should probably raise my hand. So that's kind of similar to what those people in this experiment were dealing with. Yeah, so that's my presentation on conformity. Just some final takeaways. To take away from this presentation is that conformity can be positive and negative. Depending on the situation, it can also be harmful or helpful. Conformity is common and something we all fall victim to at some point in our lives, I can assume. It really just depends the scale that you fall on. Is it positive conformity or it's negative conformity? So yeah, that's my presentation.